Supreme Court nominee. We take an in-depth look at Judge Brett Kavanaugh's legal career and his Catholic roots. World stage. President Trump faces criticism from EU leaders as he leaves for a NATO summit and a four-nation tour of Europe. Immigration D-Day. We talk to a policy expert about the separation of families at the border as the deadline to reunite children expires. And a warm welcome. Christians in Pakistan greet their newly elevated cardinal. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, July 10th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, is mapping out strategy with Republican leaders ahead of a fierce confirmation battle. Democrats promise to fight tooth and nail, and some conservatives are questioning Judge Kavanaugh's commitment to social issues like abortion, calling him an establishment choice. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. After Yale Law School, Brett Kavanaugh clerked for Justice Anthony Kennedy, the man he could replace. He went on to work in the White House under George W. Bush and has spent more than a decade as an appeals court judge. Service motivates Kavanaugh, who says he strives to live by his Jesuit high school's creed, men for others.
It is my honor and privilege to announce that I will nominate Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court.
The nation meets Judge Kavanaugh and learns about the man beyond the bench.
I am part of the vibrant Catholic community in the D.C. area. The members of that community disagree about many things, but we are united by a commitment to serve.
His family attends Mass at the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Washington. He coaches CYO basketball and serves meals to the homeless with D.C.'s Catholic Charities, run by Msgr John Enzler, who watched from the front row as Kavanaugh was nominated.
40 years ago, I was an altar boy for Father John.
He's just something special. I mean, I think so. Words like integrity. I mean, he just has a huge heart for doing the right thing. I think commitment to other people, service. He said it last night, and the motto of the Jesuit schools is, be a man for others. That's what he's trying to live.
President Trump says he doesn't ask a nominee's personal opinions, adding this morning he hasn't discussed abortion with Kavanaugh.
No, I haven't. I really haven't. We haven't discussed it.
But 12 years on the D.C. Court of Appeals leaves a long paper trail and plenty to analyze. Just last year, Kavanaugh disagreed when the court ruled the Trump administration must help facilitate an undocumented immigrant teen's abortion. His dissent recognized the government's, quote, permissible interest in favoring fetal life, protecting the best interest of a minor, and refraining from facilitating abortion. During his 2006 confirmation to the D.C. Circuit Court, he promised to follow the binding precedent of Roe v. Wade,
faithfully and fully,
without sharing his personal views on abortion. And from inside the White House last night, he noted a simple principle that guides his decisions.
My judicial philosophy is straightforward. A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law.
Msgr John Enzler, the priest we spoke to, told us Kavanaugh is a good, strong Catholic, goes to church every Sunday, lives his faith, and because of that, Enzler presumes Kavanaugh is pro-life and will live his beliefs as a Supreme Court justice. Lauren.
Mark, I know the White House tried to keep this pick a secret, and when did Msgr Enzler learn that Kavanaugh was the choice?
That's right. Msgr told us that Kavanaugh called him Sunday and told him to keep his Monday night schedule free just in case Kavanaugh was the nominee. But Msgr did not hear anything until 6 p.m. last night when the White House notified him to come over just 3 hours before the big announcement. Lauren.
Well, that is keeping it secret. Now they need to put a lid on leaks like they protect those justices.
It's hard to do.
That is hard. Thank you so much. White House correspondent Mark Irons. First stop for Judge Kavanaugh today, a tour of Capitol Hill to meet senators. The chamber has a solemn duty of deciding whether to confirm him to a lifetime job on the highest court in the land. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Senators are already making up their minds, even though the confirmation vote is probably 2 months away. This is day one of what's already a fierce battle. But today on Capitol Hill, GOP leaders offer a grand welcome to Judge Kavanaugh. A Secret Service motorcade protects the vice president and the man who could be the next Supreme Court justice. But that protection won't stop Democrats from attacking Judge Brett Kavanaugh.
A vote for President Trump's Judge Kavanaugh is a vote to allow 5 men on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade.
If anyone believes that Judge Kavanaugh or anyone else on the list would uphold Roe v. Wade, then I have a bridge to sell them.
Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh is
the Judicial Crisis Network has already launched a campaign to defend Kavanaugh. The conservative group is pumping $1.4 million into these ads. Their goal, to win over 3 Democrats who voted for Justice Neil Gorsuch and Alabama's Democratic Senator Doug Jones. The group's chief counsel and policy director says there's a key issue at stake.
It's religious freedom, and he has had the opportunity to address it and had been very sound in understanding the importance of full-throated defense of our First Amendment rights. So that's encouraging to see another justice who recognizes the importance of religious freedom coming to the Supreme Court.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh today didn't speak to reporters, but he got a public endorsement from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I think the president made an outstanding nomination.
The nominee also met with the senator in charge of his upcoming confirmation hearing.
He's a respected jurist in the court he sits on. Outstanding opinions that I think are going to be gone through by every lawyer, at least on our committee.
Judge Kavanaugh will meet with senators behind closed doors for the rest of the summer. He says he'll teach them that he reveres the Constitution. Now, on average, a confirmation hearing takes place about 40 days after the nomination, so that hearing should be in August. Lauren?
Liberal groups, Jason, are vowing to block Kavanaugh's nomination. The ad wars have begun. What can we expect?
One group called Demand Justice is spending $5 million on ads targeting 2 Republicans who support abortion. That's Senators Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine. If they, plus all Senate Democrats, vote against Kavanaugh, he will not be confirmed.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Joining me now to talk more about the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh is Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome back to the program.
Hey, Lauren.
You just heard about the ad wars.
Right.
Millions and millions of dollars. And it happened with Gorsuch, with Judge Gorsuch as well. Justice Gorsuch. In this partisan environment where everybody's heels are dug in, does an ad campaign influence a senator's decision to vote?
You know, I don't know the answer to that, but I would tell you that the ad campaigns that liberals are running are aimed at Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. But if you look at their votes on other judicial nominees that the Trump administration has done for the courts of appeal, they have voted for all of them. And those judges that have now won the courts of appeals, many of them are very conservative, just like Brett Kavanaugh is. So I think the idea that they're going to be able to change their mind, I don't think that's going to happen.
Judge Kavanaugh said last night, a judge must interpret the Constitution as written. Is he as much of an originalist as Justice Antonin Scalia was?
No, I think he is, and we know that because of his record. He's been on the Court of Appeals for more than 10 years. He's written 300 opinions, and they cover everything from the First Amendment and religious liberty rights to the Second Amendment and many other issues. And you can see in those cases that he is a textualist, someone who believes in applying the Constitution as it's written.
We listened to him last night, and I could not believe that he used the words Father John Enzler, who I know very well, and Father John was sitting in the front row, and I thought, this is a display of his Catholic faith. He talked about it a lot, as we have heard. Does religion have a role in a Supreme Court nomination?
Well, it doesn't if senators are going to use that as a religious test. And as you know, that's prohibited by the Constitution. And there were some very nasty, inappropriate questions that were asked last year for Amy Barrett.
to Judge Amy Barrett.
Right.
The dogma lives loudly within you, is what Senator Dianne Feinstein said.
Right, exactly right. And, you know, Barrett made it very clear that while she lives her life according to her religious principles, that was not going to affect the way she did her judging. And I think Brett Kavanaugh has made that also very clear again in the many, many opinions that he's written.
But doesn't faith, I mean, my faith affects what I do every day, but I also work at EWTN. It affected what I did when I worked in secular media. Isn't his faith going to affect how he thinks about especially overturning Roe versus Wade, if that's even possible?
Not to the extent where it's going to interfere with his applying the Constitution. And I'll give you a typical example of what I mean. Look, judges are faced all the time with policies that are implemented by Congress that they may think are unwise. You know, Justice Scalia once famously said, well, it may be a stupid law, but it's constitutional. The fact that the judge thinks that something might be immoral, for example, because of their faith, as long as the Constitution says this is something the government can do, or something the Constitution says the government can't do, that's what they have to do, apply it that way.
Hans von Spakovsky, thank you so much for joining us, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
Sure, thanks for having me.
President Trump landed in Europe this afternoon. Before he left, he called out NATO allies for not paying enough money into the group, and he said the military alliance benefits Europe far more than the United States. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump and Defense Secretary James Mattis are now in Brussels. They'll attend a NATO summit over the next 2 days. The president says that European members need to step up.
We do have a lot of allies, but we cannot be taken advantage of. We're being taken advantage of by the European Union. We lost $151 billion last year on trade. And on top of that, we spend at least 70% for NATO. And frankly, it helps them a lot more than it helps us. So we'll see what happens.
The president responding this morning to criticism by a senior European Union official, Donald Tusk. Tusk accuses President Trump of criticizing Europe almost daily and is urging the president to remember who his friends are.
Dear America, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many. And Europe spend more on your defense because everyone respects an ally that is well prepared and equipped. Money is important, but genuine solidarity is even more important.
Tusk went on to say that Europeans are spending more on defense than Russia and just as much as China. It's not the first time the president has been tough on NATO. Before he took office, President Trump called out members of the military alliance for failing to spend at least 2% of their GDP towards their own military. The president and the First Lady took Air Force One this morning to NATO headquarters in Brussels, but it's not their only step. From there, the president will travel to England to meet the Queen and then to Scotland for a golf weekend. Then finally on Monday, he will meet with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Finland. Lauren?
Wyatt, President Trump and Secretary Mattis will be talking about Russia during the NATO summit. The president's relationship with Vladimir Putin has been receiving a lot of scrutiny. What will the conversation look like? What does President Trump at this point in time want from Putin?
It's hard to say for sure, Lauren. The president says he's not even sure whether or not he would classify the Russian leader as a friend or a foe. What he did say, the word they did use, was that he called Putin a competitor and admits the two have very different goals here. And that's what they'll be thinking about during this NATO summit. Putin wants the U.S. to end all of its military presence in Europe and at least scale back U.S. forces. But at this point, the United States has no plans to do that. The other sticking point here is sanctions, and the U.S. has no plans to let up on any Russian sanctions either. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the Pentagon. Thank you, Wyatt. A victim of clergy sex abuse in Pennsylvania is asking the state's highest court to allow the release of a grand jury report. The state Supreme Court is holding that report while it accepts written arguments from current and former priests named in it. The 2-year investigation looked at 6 dioceses in Pennsylvania. A bishop in Montana criticizes 4 priests for wearing their collars to a rally for President Trump last week. Bishop Michael Warfel of the Great Falls Billings Diocese says he was shocked to see the men in a prominent location. 2 of the priests are from the Diocese of Great Falls. The other 2 are from Helena. Bishop Warfel says the 2 priests from his diocese have apologized. The diocese has updated its policy on political involvement, prohibiting priests to show their support for or against a candidate. The restriction does not apply to the church's involvement in larger political issues. Pope Francis is praying for the victims of floods in Japan and encouraging authorities involved in search and rescue operations. In a note sent to Catholic authorities, the Holy Father says he is sad to learn of the loss of life created by heavy rains and mudslides. At least 80 people are unaccounted for and 150 are believed dead. Francis is offering his encouragement to rescue crews and says he is praying for the dead and injured. Speaking of rescues, all 12 boys and their soccer coach have been rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand, ending an 18-day ordeal that riveted people around the world. 8 of the boys have been examined by doctors and they say they're healthy and in good spirits. One rescuer said, "We are not sure this is a miracle or science or what, but everyone is safe." Masked supporters of Nicaragua's government attack a group of priests, injuring an auxiliary bishop. It happened as the priests were making their way to help protesters. The attack did not prevent Bishop Baez and Cardinal Brenes from going to another church to pray. Tensions have been rising since the government announced cuts to Social Security in mid-April. More than 250 people have been killed in violence. Coming up, President Trump says he has a solution for children being separated from their parents at the border. And a policy expert takes us through the process of reuniting immigrant families. President Trump says he has the answer to the uproar over reuniting young migrant children with their parents.
Well, I have a solution. Tell people not to come to our country illegally. That's the solution. Don't come to our country illegally. Come like other people do. Come legally.
A federal judge in San Diego set today as a deadline to reunite children under the age of 5 with their families. Dozens will be returned, but the government says around 50 remain in custody. That is a fluid number. Well, the White House officials say there are under 3,000 separated children overall. Joining me now is Alfonso Aguilar, President, Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. Alfonso, welcome back to the program.
Happy to be with you.
Why can they not reunite these children with their parents by this deadline? What's the problem?
Well, it's incredible. Look, this was a poorly conceived and executed strategy. And initially they told us there were 2,000 children. All of a sudden it's 3,000. So the problem they're having is that a lot of the adults were released into the community here in the United States, or many were...
Which is typical, waiting for a hearing.
Which is typical, correct. And some were actually removed back to Mexico or their home country. So
maybe some were imprisoned. I'm not sure if that has happened or not, but
that
it's
is
a
possibility. So it is very difficult. Now, the deadlines imposed by the court are kind of artificial. The court is saying you have to do it by this time, but it's very difficult now for HHS. I think it was the Department of Homeland Security that created this mess, and now HHS has the responsibility of matching the children with the parents. It's very difficult. I don't know if they're going to be able to meet the deadline, even for the rest of the children by 2 weeks from now.
July 26th,
Correct.
Which is the next date that has to be met. Only about half of the children are being reunited. We don't know when or if the other one can be, half of those little ones.
Correct.
Last month, I visited a shelter in northern Mexico City for people seeking asylum or refugee status in Mexico. Many of them were just children, as you can see here, and mothers who were fleeing gang violence and poverty. Let's listen to Catholic Relief Services.
In our youth program in El Salvador, one of the parents told us that they prefer their child to be kept in the detention centers in the US than killed in El Salvador.
Now, that flies in the face of what President Trump is saying. Don't come here illegally, which is what people say.
Well, with asylum seekers is differently. They're supposed to show up at the ports of entry. Now, some of them can enter immediately because, frankly, we're being flooded with all these people coming from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, the
Northern Triangle
countries where there's so much violence, and they have to wait right outside the port of entry to be processed. So it's not that the United States doesn't want to process these asylum seekers, it's just that they don't have the capacity to allow everyone in. So they're going to have to wait in the Mexico side of the border to be processed.
What is the bigger picture solution, especially for those whose lives are in danger? When you hear about illegal immigrants, it's not just people who are coming to have a better economic life, but it is people, as you said, who are asylum seekers.
Look, I think we need immigration reform. We need to find a way to facilitate.
Well, good luck with that. We've tried that twice.
But that's the problem. Because we don't have immigration reform, you've had administrations, not only the Trump administration, but other administrations, including the Obama administration, the Bush administration, have had the similar challenges. Under Obama, there was separation of families at the border. The parents, a father was removed from mother and child. This policy that the president instituted is, I think it's cruel and unfair. It's much worse than what was done under the Obama administration, but it still happened.
Wait, you think it's cruel and fair, you said?
Unfair.
Unfair. Sorry. Okay.
So it's worse than what happened during the Obama years, but certainly there was still separation of families during the Obama years. As we have to really, there's only one alternative, and it's legislative. My concern right now, as we move forward, the president, the alternative because the president wants to continue with his zero tolerance policy, meaning that everybody that enters illegally will be referred for criminal prosecution. My concern with that is that what they want to do is to detain the families together, but indefinitely. And we have this Flores Agreement, which it dates back to the Clinton years, which basically says that children cannot be detained, cannot be held in detention for more than 20 years, for 20 days.
20 days.
So the alternative that the administration has is to release all the families, or actually go back to the old policy of actually separating children from parents. This is a very difficult situation. And if you release the families altogether, you know what happens? They disappear. You give them a court order, but they don't appear.
They never come back.
So that's why you need immigration reform. It's a very difficult situation.
The one thing I learned from my trip to Mexico and to the border, traveling with the Border Patrol, is that there is no easy solution to this. Alfonso Aguilar, thank you so much. President, Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles.
Thank you.
Up next, the Vatican allegedly drops criminal charges against a former official. And a new cardinal receives a hero's welcome in his Muslim homeland. President Trump has pardoned 2 ranchers whose case sparked the takeover of an Oregon wildlife refuge. Dwight and Stephen Hammond were arrested for setting fires on public lands. They received a lenient prison sentence, which was later overturned, and they were given the maximum sentence. And that prompted protesters to occupy land near the Hammonds' farm. The Vatican's former Auditor General says the Holy See has dropped criminal charges against him 1 year after he was forced to step down. Libero Miloni was investigating financial misconduct at the Vatican. He claims he was forced to resign in June of last year after uncovering financial abuses. His work was part of the Pope's financial reforms. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, why are the criminal charges allegedly being dropped now?
Lauren, we don't know. The Vatican hasn't confirmed that the charges have been dropped, and it hasn't issued any statement or clarification. So it could be an attempt to keep the reforms on track and to avoid another scandal. Our colleague Edward Penton of the National Catholic Register has been following this story extensively, and his sources are telling him that Milone had stumbled upon financial abuses and had to be removed.
What exactly was he accused of?
Well, in an interview on Italian television just recently, Meloni says the Vatican suspected him of spying on Vatican employees and officials during his financial audit. Now, the former Deloitte executive says he was fired after a raid by Vatican police on his office in June of last year. And he says the Vatican police forced him to resign. Now, Meloni maintains his innocence, and he says that he was blocked by what he calls the old guard that is still very much present at the Vatican, Lauren.
Meloni's work was part of a widespread overhaul of the Vatican's finances. So now that this has happened, where do the reforms stand?
Well, yeah, Lauren, for the last 13 months, the Vatican has had no chief auditor, so there's been nobody overseeing the investigation into Vatican finances. And as we know, Cardinal George Pell, who is in charge of Vatican finances, is currently in Australia facing trial on sex abuse charges. But the Pope is pressing on, Lauren, with the reforms, and he has vowed to continue cleaning up the Vatican.
Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
And finally tonight, Christians in Pakistan give a warm welcome to their newly appointed cardinal. 73-year-old Joseph Coots is one of 14 elevated by Pope Francis in June. The Pakistani government says his promotion is an honor for Pakistan, where Christians face discrimination and have been targeted by terrorists. Pakistan is roughly 2% Christian. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.